Chapter 10 No Revenge. The secret meeting between the heads of the 5 New York families and all the other important families in America took place in a large room above a bank. Everybody sat around a large table, each head with his consigliere sitting close behind. Don Corleone, who had invited them all, was the first to stand up and speak. "How did things get so far?" he said. "It's so unnecessary." He looked at the small man with dark, oily hair and shadows under his eyes who was sitting opposite him. "Tartaglia, you've lost a son. I've lost a son too. Why can't we stop this foolish war now before more people die?" A handsome man with silver hair who sat at one end of the table began to speak. This was Barzini. "We all know Don Corleone is an honest man," he said. "We can trust him." "Yes," Tartaglia said to Barzini. "He has many important friends, but he refused to share them with us." "I only ever refused to help you once." Don Corleone looked at Tartaglia. He was thinking about the meeting with Salazzo. "I refused to help you because I don't like the drugs business." "Times have changed," Barzini said. "A man who refuses to help his friends is not a true friend. Don Corleone must share his important friends in law and government with us. We will pay him well for his help, of course." The Godfathers talked for a long time. Finally Don Corleone said, "I'm a man you can trust. I'll do whatever I can for peace." "Then we all agree." Barzini smiled. "The drugs business will be permitted, but controlled. And Don Corleone will share his important friends with us. If Don Corleone promises not to take revenge on us for his son's death," Tartaglia said. Don Corleone looked sadly at Tartaglia. "Is revenge going to bring your son back to you? Or my boy to me?" "I promise there will be no revenge. But only if my youngest son is permitted to come back safely. He has had to live abroad since that Salazzo business. I want him home. But I warn you, if anything happens to my son, if he mysteriously falls off the boat on his way home, or if he's hit by lightning after he returns, then I will blame some of the people in this room. That I will not forgive. But if my son is permitted to return safely to New York, then I promise I will not be the one to break the peace we have made here today." At this, he stood up and opened his arms to Tartaglia. Tartaglia stood up too, and the two men walked around the table. They met behind Barzini's chair and hugged each other warmly. Then all the Godfathers in the room stood up and began to hug and kiss each other, congratulating each other on the end of the war. Chapter 11 Ghost from the past. One autumn afternoon, as Kay was walking home, she saw a large black car parked outside the school, where she was a teacher. Next to the car, there was a serious-looking man in a black hat and long black coat, watching her. Kay stopped as if she had seen a ghost. "Michael," she said. "How long have you been back?" "About a year," he said quietly. Then, walking slowly towards her, he said, "It's good to see you, Kay." They walked together through the park, hands in pockets, a little shy with each other after so much time. "I'm working for my father now," Michael explained. "He's been sick. Very sick." "But you're not like him," Kay replied. "I thought you weren't going to become a man like your father. As I've grown older, I've learned to respect him more. He's just an ordinary man who loves his family, that's all." "Ordinary men don't have other men killed," Kay said. "Listen, Kay." Michael stopped walking and looked her in the eyes. "In 5 years' time, my family will have no more problems. We'll be a lawful, respectable family. Trust me. That's all I can tell you about my business." Kay's eyes filled with tears. "Michael, why did you come here?" she said. "What do you want with me after all this time? You didn't call. You didn't write. I came here because I need you. I care for you. Please stop it." But Michael went on. "Because I want you to marry me." Kay shook her head. "It's too late." "I promise I'll do anything you ask," Michael continued in a soft, calm voice. "Let's forget the last 2 years. What's important is that we have each other, that we have children. Kay, I need you. And I love you." As Michael was speaking, Kay kept looking away. She didn't know what to say. Michael had changed. He was different now. There was something cold about him, something hard, but in the end, this didn't matter. Before she could answer him, the large black car drove up and stopped next to them. Michael opened the back door for her and waited. In her heart, Kay realized that she still loved him. Without a word, she stepped inside the car. Chapter 12. Many changes. As months turned into years, there were many changes. Michael and Kay got married and had 2 children. Connie and Carlo Rizzi moved with their children into a house on Long Island to be near the rest of the family. Frida was sent to Las Vegas, where the Corleones had bought one hotel and were planning to buy many more. Barzini was taking advantage of the peace between the 5 families and was beginning to take over a lot of the Corleone family business in New York. Tessio and Clemenza wanted to fight Barzini before he became too strong, but Michael, who had spent long hours talking to Tom Hagen and his father, learning the family business, told them to be patient. At first, Tessio and Clemenza didn't like taking orders from Michael. They tried to talk to Don Corleone instead. But the old man said, "Do you trust me?" "Yes, Godfather," Tessio and Clemenza replied. "Then be a friend to Michael. He's head of the family now. Do as he says." As one afternoon, Michael sat in the garden with his father. Don Corleone had put on a lot of weight and moved very slowly. He spent most of his time in the garden, looking after his plants, or just sitting under a tree, drinking wine, thinking about the past. But his mind was still sharp. Michael always came to him for advice. "Be careful of Barzini," he told Michael. "He'll move against you first. He'll arrange a meeting with someone that you trust. He'll promise you safety. But at that meeting, he'll kill you." Don Corleone drank some red wine and suddenly changed the subject. "Are you happy with your wife and children?" he asked. "Very happy," Michael said softly. He wanted to hear more about Barzini, but he respected and loved his father too much to hurry him. "That's good," said Don Corleone. He looked around the garden for a moment with a sad look in his eyes, then said, "I'm sorry, I can't stop thinking about Barzini. It worries me. I always thought Sonny would be head of the family. I never wanted this for you. There just wasn't enough time." Michael gently touched his father's arm. "Don't worry, father," he said. "I'll take care of it." Don Corleone nodded, smiled to himself, then looked suddenly serious, as if he had forgotten to tell Michael something important. "What's the matter, father?" Michael asked. "Listen." Don Corleone raised one finger. "Whoever comes to you with this Barzini meeting, he's the traitor. Don't forget that." Then, standing with great difficulty, he touched Michael lovingly on the cheek and walked slowly back to the house, out of the sun. One Sunday morning, while the women were at church, Don Corleone was playing with his grandson among his tomato plants in the garden. As he tried to run away from the little boy who was chasing him, he suddenly found it hard to breathe. It was as if the sun had come down very close to his head. He stopped running and started to cough as he tried to get air into his chest. The little boy laughed, thinking this was part of the game. Don Corleone bent forward, coughing more and more, and then he felt it. An explosion of fire inside his chest. With a cry of pain, he fell back among his tomato plants, dead. All his life, people had tried to kill him. They had failed in the end. Don Vito Corleone died a natural death, playing with his grandson in his garden on a peaceful Sunday morning. Chapter 13. Traitor. At the funeral, Michael sat with his family as people walked past, one by one, throwing flowers onto his father's grave. Michael studied their faces carefully. Clemenza, Tessio, Enzo the butcher, Johnny Fontaine, all the people that his father had helped in his long and dangerous life. Some of his enemies were at the funeral too. Barzini threw a red rose onto the grave and lowered his eyes respectfully in Michael's direction. Michael stared at him coldly as he turned and walked away. A few minutes later, Tessio walked up to Michael and whispered something in his ear. Michael stood up and walked away from the grave to hear what Tessio wanted to say. "Barzini wants to arrange a meeting," Tessio said. "He says we can solve all our problems." "Did you talk to him?" "Yes, I can arrange everything. Trust me." Michael looked at Tessio. He had known him all his life. He had always been like an uncle to him, but Michael remembered his father's words. "Whoever comes to you with this Barzini meeting, he's the traitor," and he felt a great sadness in his heart. "All right," Michael said quietly, and he returned to his seat by his father's grave. He told Tom, who was sitting next to him, about his conversation with Tessio. Tom shook his head sadly. "I always thought it would be Clemenza," he said. "No," said Michael, "this is a clever move, and Tessio's cleverer than Clemenza. But I'm going to wait. I've decided to be godfather to Connie's baby, and then I'm going to meet Barzini, To Taglia and all the heads of the 5 families, he watched Tessio, who was standing some distance away, shaking hands and talking with Barzini. He hadn't told Tom the whole truth. Tom was not a consigliere anymore, so he didn't know everything in the way that he used to. The truth was that Michael had already decided to kill all his enemies. They were going to die on the day he stood as godfather to Connie's child.